Are you ready for the strange case of the Black Knight satellite?
Section 51.
Section 51.
Section 51.
Hi everyone, what's up? I am GH, aka DOSGeek. It's nice to be back here with you on Section 51. Now it's time for new space adventures. So, if you hear of the Black Knight, you might imagine an evil medieval knight riding a black horse, pillaging entire villages and murdering people. Fear not, but perhaps at the end of this story, you just might wish your horse-backed Dark Knight were real. The Black Knight is the name of an obscure dark object orbiting Earth which was captured by a NASA astronaut on camera during a space shuttle mission in 1998. In fact, it's a 1998 NASA photo which is believed by some to show the Black Knight satellite, but NASA has stated that this is likely space debris, specifically a thermal blanket lost during an EVA mission or extravehicular activity. EVA means some activity done by an astronaut or cosmonaut outside a spacecraft beyond the Earth's appreciable atmosphere. The term most commonly applies to a spacewalk made outside a craft orbiting Earth, such as the International Space Station, but also as applied to lunar surface exploration, commonly known as moonwalks, performed by 6 pairs of American astronauts in the Apollo program from 1969 to 1972. On each of the last 3 of these missions, astronauts also performed deep space EVAs on the return to Earth to retrieve film canisters from the outside of the spacecraft. Astronauts also used EVA in 1973 to repair launch damage to Skylab, the United States' first space station. So, according to conspiracy theorists, conspiracy, how much do I love this term? Or rather, it makes me laugh because it's kind of a catch-all with no real sense where the self-righteous people put everyone who thinks differently. So according to the conspiracy theorists, as it is generally said, the origin of this craft is extraterrestrial and, as some have reasoned out, it might be as old as 13,000 years. First of all, how do we know that it is 13,000 years old? If anyone knows exactly what method of dating was used, please let me know. And who did the dating? So, already many questions with no answer. How can we issue so many theories with so few verified facts? We have to admit that we start on a very weak basis. But let's continue our study on the subject. Mysteries about the Black Knight have been with us since the mid-20th century. In fact, there seems to be a rich amalgamation of several different stories, all relating to this strange, airy object. The Black Knight lore begins with Nikola Tesla. You remember, of course, we ever talked about Tesla in a previous video on this channel. And in 1899, the genius thought he had heard from aliens himself. That year, Tesla was carrying out experiments with a tall, bulky tower he had installed at his property in Colorado Springs. The pursuit of his endeavors was wireless power experiments, and as accounts suggest, he accidentally picked up some signals from outer space. Tesla did consider that the received signals might be coming from an intelligent life form, perhaps from someone on Mars. When he shared this with contemporaries, he was largely dismissed. And years later, in 1968, scientists were able to validate that Tesla could have really received some kind of transmission. However, the explanation was that any signal that arrived had probably been emitted from some object floating in space, such as pulsars. Also, Tesla himself never asserted that he picked up something from a satellite making its way around Earth. But here again, some conspiracy theorists have surmised that the origin of these transmissions was precisely the Black Knight. Further on in the narrative about this obscure artifact, floating somewhere out there near us, the Black Knight could have made its next contact in 1927. Only this time it surprised Jørgen Hals, an engineer from Norway who was carrying out radio signal experiments. Hals couldn't explain why some of the signals he sent echoed back a few moments after the initial transmissions halted. For years, the mystery prevailed. More than 4 decades later, Scottish sci-fi writer Duncan Lunnan wrote an article that was published in Spaceflight magazine, which tried to explain the strange signals picked up by Hals. He analyzed the long-delayed radio echoes received by Hals and others and speculated that they could possibly originate from a 13,000-year-old alien probe located in an orbit around the Earth's moon. He suggested that the probe may have originated from a planet located in the solar system of star Epsilon Bootis. Lunnan never clearly made any mention of the Black Knight, yet some theorists reportedly began affiliating the object he mentions with the strange dark structure. But Lunnan later retracted his conclusions, saying that he had made outright errors and that his methods had been unscientific. Did he tell the truth, or has he been under pressure or threatened? It's hard to say today. Another sci-fi writer, Donald Edward Keough, is also associated with the Black Knight phenomenon. Keough was a retired Marine Corps naval aviator, someone who had researched UFOs and took on writing fiction. His work and writing were most popular during the 1950s and 1960s, when the Cold War was at its peak and science fiction was entering its golden era. According to Keough, aliens had indeed visited our home planet. Supposedly, he further made claims that a pair of satellites orbiting our planet were detected by the US Air Force in 1954, which is 3 years before the first human-launched satellite was sent into orbit. Presumably, Keough shared such statements to boost the popularity of his fiction. Keough's statements, again, are linked with the Black Knight, just like another story that showed up in Time magazine in 1960. The story described a satellite in a strange near-polar orbit that was initially correlated with Soviet spying. A clearer explanation was published a few weeks later, saying the odd-looking piece belonged to the US Discoverer satellite. In 1963, astronaut Gordon Cooper supposedly reported a UFO sighting during his 15th orbit in Mercury 9 that was confirmed by tracking stations, but there is no evidence that this happened. Neither NASA's mission transcript nor Cooper's personal copies show any such report being made during the orbit. So in the end, the entire fuss about the Black Knight can be reduced to the spread of unsubstantiated stories and the unverified interpretation of others. According to NASA and astronaut Jerry Ross, the object and all the stories connected to it are merely the result of sleep. In 1998, a space shuttle mission was carried out at the International Space Station. The same mission which provided the most compelling evidence to conspiracists about the existence of the Black Knight photographs. The NASA mission that year, named STS-88, was launched on December the 4th, shortly after the time when construction of the International Space Station commenced by joining together the US and Russian modules. Part of the mission included spacewalking, in which the team needed to install thermal space blankets for insulation on some of the components. During the proceedings, they lost several items, a normal thing that happens with these kinds of missions, including one of the thermal blankets they carried. As the item traversed away from the astronauts, becoming unreachable in the vastness of space, they had it photographed. Following protocol, the piece was catalogued as space debris by the US Space Surveillance Network. So, while NASA explains the photos of the much-discussed dark objects as a lost space blanket, conspiracy theorists keep looking at it and saying, "This is the famed mysterious Black Knight deployed there by aliens." On the other hand, what most people don't realize is that 6,000 satellites have been launched into Earth's orbit since the Soviet Union sent Sputnik 1 into space back in 1957. These man-made satellites have served various purposes, such as means of communication, navigation, and exploration. Estimates suggest that around 3,600 so far have remained in orbit, out of which far fewer are still operational. Once these satellites fulfill their purpose and reach life expectancy, they become nothing more than a space debris. It's very easy to spot some of them orbiting in the skies, including the largest one of all, the International Space Station. However, none of them match the Black Knight, a highly mysterious and much debated satellite in the power of storytelling. Over the years, reports of the Black Knight satellite have accumulated, but according to many, they are the result of unverified stories, overzealous reporters, and over-interpreted photographs. As NASA astronaut Jerry Ross says, the object and all the speculations about it are simply the results of a mistake. After more than a century of speculation, the big question still remained. Are there ancient alien satellites in Earth's orbit? Let's start with verifiable evidence and some facts. 1. We have now evidence of UFOs in space. Following the radar sightings in the 1950s and 60s, both the Soviets and the Americans would start to send men into space. If there was something alien up there, it surely wouldn't be long before one of them encountered it. In 1963, astronaut Gordon Cooper was orbiting the planet in his Mercury space capsule. He reported seeing an object near his craft that glowed with a greenish hue. Back on Earth, this UFO was seen by dozens of witnesses on the radar screens at NASA's Mutchea tracking station in Australia, and the news was widely reported in the press. NASA's reaction was odd. They forbid reporters from asking Cooper about the UFO. Later, they would put out a story that a carbon monoxide leak in the capsule had caused Cooper to hallucinate the sighting. 2 years later, Major James McDivitt, passing over Hawaii in Gemini 4, saw a long white cylindrical object with protruding angular arms flying close to his capsule. 1968's Condon report, widely seen as a government attempt to debunk the UFO phenomena, was unable to find a rational explanation for McDivitt's sighting, describing it as especially puzzling. Some critics of McDivitt's UFO have suggested it was the discarded second stage of the Titan rocket. But after seeing a photograph of the second stage, McDivitt dismissed the possibility and said, I am sure that this is not a photograph of the object which I described many times. In 1969, the astronauts of the most famous spaceflight of all, Apollo 11, saw something strange out of the module's window. Early in their journey, Buzz Aldrin described a glowing object outside that appeared to be tracking Apollo's path. At the time, NASA kept the encounter secret, and the astronauts only make an oblique reference to it in their communications. There was something out there, close enough to be observed. And what could it be? Aldrin said that in 2005. Now, obviously, the three of us weren't going to blurt out, "Hey Houston, we've got something moving alongside of us and we don't know what it is, you know?" Were the objects encountered by the NASA astronauts, Bracewell probes, or even the famous Black Knight satellite? According to Gordon Cooper, one of America's pioneering early astronauts, encounters like these are common and well documented at NASA but are always kept secret. For many years I have lived with a secret, in a secrecy imposed on all specialists in astronautics. I can now reveal that every day in the USA, our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us, and there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this, but nobody wants to make them public. 2. The Epsilon Bootis calling. This is the message, or rather the Epsilon Bootis calling.
Start here. Our home is Epsilon Bootis, which is a double star. We live on the 6th planet of 7. Check that, 6th of 7. Counting outwards from the Sun, which is the larger of the two. Our 6th planet has 1 moon. Our 4th planet has 3. Our 1st and 3rd planets each have 1. Our probe is in the orbit of your moon. This updates the position of Arcturus shown on our maps.
This is the amazing message science writer and amateur astronomer Duncan Lennon claimed to have decoded from the long delay echo data gathered in 1928. The message, according to Lennon, originated from a stable point between the orbits of the Earth and the Moon called the L5. Along with this, Lennon found the varying delays shown in the echoes when mapped on a graph formed a map of the Epsilon Bootis star system. Lennon made his discovery in 1972, but the star system he saw was not how it looked in the skies then. Lennon was puzzled, but he had a hunch. If this really was an alien probe, it must have taken many years to reach Earth, perhaps thousands of years. Could the map be how the constellation looked sometime in the past, a time that would reveal when the probe was launched? The hunch proved to be correct. The map matched how Epsilon Bootis looked some 13,000 years ago. If Lennon was right, the implications were staggering. A satellite from a far distant alien civilization had been orbiting the planet since prehistory. Professor Bracewell, who coined the idea of alien satellites, was convinced Lennon had proved his theory. Lennon's findings were also validated by the prestigious British Interplanetary Society, the oldest space advocacy body in the world. But a few years later, as we ever said, Lennon withdrew his findings, not because the message wasn't there, but because he no longer believed Epsilon Bootis could sustain intelligent life. This seems a somewhat odd position. The information he found in the LDE data was either there or it wasn't, and it seems staggeringly unlikely the message could have occurred by chance. Lennon hasn't given up on Epsilon Bootis altogether, however. His latest research suggests the star system's location is also coded into ancient monuments on Earth like Stonehenge and the pyramids. Even if the probe wasn't from Epsilon Bootis itself, was someone somewhere trying to point mankind's attention to this mysterious star system 103 million light-years away. 3. The Black Knight doesn't match with any space debris mentioned by NASA or other official authorities. It is often suggested that the sightings of strange objects in Earth's orbit are space debris. This explanation is routinely used whenever news of such discoveries reach the press. Back in 1960, when the US Navy radar system Dark Fence spotted a huge object in polar orbit, it was quickly dismissed as space debris from the Discoverer program. However, the object Dark Fence observed seemed to be too large and heavy to be space debris. It was estimated to be as much as 15 tons, far in excess of what any country in the world was capable of getting into space in 1960. The Russians had the most powerful rockets at the time, but the heaviest payload they could manage was just over 2,000 pounds. The UFO was incredibly erratic, its orbit was hard to predict, and studying it proved difficult. But the Grumman Aircraft Corporation in New York managed to get a photograph of it, and it was apparently orange. Nothing on the Discoverer, a program which was actually a cover for the then secret Corona spy satellite, was orange. Clearly, whatever Dark Fence had spotted was not space debris. The most detailed ever pictures of a UFO in space were taken by the Space Shuttle Endeavour in 1998. These are the images most often cited as proof of the Dark Knight's existence. NASA, however, dismissed the object as a thermal insulation blanket accidentally dropped by an astronaut whilst constructing the International Space Station. Again, like the 1960 explanation, this doesn't quite fit the facts. Although in most of the photos it's hard to determine the scale of the object, one image does show it some distance below the space shuttle. Even without taking perspective into account, the object appears to be as long as the shuttle's cargo bay door, which was 60 feet long. This would make it at least 10 times larger than the insulation blankets used on the ISS. 4. We have different versions of the Black Knight. Indeed, critics of the Black Knight satellite theory point out that much of the evidence cited in its favor is actually unconnected. Of the many Black Knight candidate objects purportedly observed over the years, no two appear alike. The size, color, shape, and appearance vary each time. Some have polar orbits, others are equatorial. And Duncan Lennan's proposed alien satellite wasn't in Earth's orbit at all, but the Moon's. Some of the sightings also appear not to be genuine. The reports from 1954 about two unknown satellites being observed in orbit seems to have originated from articles written by UFO proponent Donald Keough. It has been suggested that Keough's speculations about alien satellites got conflated by the press with real Army space tracking experiments conducted by astronomer Clyde Tombaugh to create a completely fictitious story that the Army had found UFOs in orbit. Gordon Cooper's reported sighting of a green UFO in 1963 seems solid enough, but even ardent UFO believer Cooper later denied he had made any such observation, attributing it to over-imaginative reporters. As for Tesla, whilst accounts of the Black Knight satellite often begin with the famous inventor, his presence in the story doesn't seem particularly warranted other than to add an extra layer of mystery. The signals he observed, whether they were pulsars or not, were quite different to the LDEs and appear to have little or nothing in common with Bracewell probes and the Black Knight satellite. The curious phenomena of long delay echoes are pivotal to many of the Black Knight satellite theories. LDEs are reflections of radio signals that return to the observer at random intervals, usually between 3 and 15 seconds. If Black Knight was a Bracewell probe, as is often suggested, it would send some kind of signal to alert us to its presence. Are those signals the mysterious LDEs? One of the many curious aspects of LDEs is that they were far more common in the early days of radio communications, especially the 1920s and 30s, than they are today. If there was some intelligence behind these signals, could it be of a more earthly origin? One suggestion is the signals were part of a top-secret military experiment to piggyback covert signals inside conventional radio station broadcasts. A spy could set up his equipment close to a radio tower and rebroadcast its signals with varying delay times, the delays spelling out a message in a similar manner to the dots and dashes of Morse code. Scandinavia, the source of many of the early LDE observations, was gripped by a puzzling phenomena in the 1930s involving ghost flyers, strange unidentified aircraft spotted over the countries. Accompanying the ghost planes were numerous signals piggybacked on top of commercial radio broadcasts. Some of the signals were messages in broken Swedish and mentioned the aircraft. Around the same time, similar accounts appeared in other countries, and it's now believed the ghost flyer phenomena was actually part of an early military spy plane program. Could a secret military program like this be the true source of the LDEs? Rather than messages from the stars, were these messages from spies? Will we know one day if the Black Knight is real or not? And if it's real, what will we find inside? Is it still active? Can it be a threat to the Earth or humans? Did NASA ever secretly intercept the Black Knight? The least we can say is that this famous Black Knight still has many mysteries to reveal. But maybe after all, we should leave this part of mystery because we just don't want to be disappointed by the truth. Maybe the truth is somewhere else. Thanks for watching. I'll be back really soon. Open your eyes, watch the sky. Live long and prosper.